We have a brief prayer. Then we take welcome remarks from Ghana Statistical Service, UNDP, and then we'll zoom straight into the presentation on the key findings of the study. And after which we'll give the opportunity for participants online and our in-house participants to ask questions or make comments. Then we wrap it up with a comment from our UNDP partners, and we call it a day. We are grateful having you with us. And let me just provide some few guidelines. During the Q&A section, we respectfully ask our online participants to use the chat box. Either they raise their hand and we give them the opportunity to ask questions or make comments, or they can post their questions or comments in the chat room, and we'll read them all accordingly. Please, we respectfully ask that if you have not been called to make a comment, kindly mute your microphone. And after talking, please do mute your microphone. I thank you for your audience and we welcome you once again. We shall call upon Emmanuel Bedu to, as usual, commit us and the program into the hands of the Almighty Lord. DSS normally will do programs such as these by first giving God the praises. Emmanuel Bedu, please.
Father Almighty, we thank you for this day. Father, we want to thank you for granting us traveling mercies to be gathered here. We are going to celebrate on our nation. Father, we ask for your guidance and protection so that whatever we are coming to do here, we be glorified in your name. Also, Father, we pray that all those who are going to perform one or two duties here, Father, you guide them, you protect them, you let them come out with all that we expect from them. We put this whole meeting into your care, watch over it, guide it to the successful end. We ask this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel, for that wonderful prayer. Let me quickly acknowledge the good work our team is doing behind the scene. We acknowledge the hard work by the comms department of UNDP and the communication department of Ghana Statistical Service. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, we will take a brief remark from the Chief Executive of Ghana Statistical Service, and that will be followed by a remark from the UNDP Deputy Resident Representative. So we welcome Professor Kobina Enim of Ghana Statistical Service to give us his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Ghana Statistical Service once again has the privilege to share with you data surrounding the experiences of the country in relation to COVID-19. As was indicated in John's opening remark, at the outset of COVID-19, what we thought we should do is to provide the government with the necessary data, one, to help fight against combating the high rate of infection, and two, as we are experiencing now, with an abatement of the infection rate, everything needs to be done to ensure that we have proper structures in place at all levels of government to ensure that we are able to curb down the impact that ordinarily COVID-19 is having on different economies. It's important we emphasize the fact that in as much as the infection rate has slowed down, and in as much as the mortality related to COVID-19 is not showing up as it was before, experiences in other countries suggest the need for us to be very circumspect and tackle the pandemic with all the seriousness that other countries that unfortunately are experiencing wave 2 of the pandemic is concerned. On this account, the other reason why at Ghana Statistical Service, this is critical for us is that in the context of local economies, we've not done that much as far as data is concerned. As a country, we focus much on issues related to aggregated economic outcomes. Specifically, we look at our GDP at the national level, and also our other headline economic indicators are also measured mostly with emphasis on what is happening at the aggregate level. With the passage of the Statistical Service Act in 2019, Act 1003, what we've thought of doing and doing it intensely at Ghana Statistical Service is to help provide disaggregated data. So what this local economy tracker seeks to do for us is to prepare ourselves to properly recover from COVID-19 as a direct reason why we are doing this exercise, but more importantly, give us a sense of how we can begin to capture our disaggregated economic activity at the local level. This has brought to the fore new insights on the approach persons to engage with different production units and different consumption units. And moving forward, we're going to use these as guidelines as we prepare to produce GDP at the local level, specifically at the regional level. Moving forward on these releases, as we mentioned during the household and job tracker, as well as the firm tracker, we indicated the commitment of the service not to just end it as a one-off data collection exercise, but potentially have second and third waves of these 2 rounds of exercises. So just as we are committed to the household job tracker and the firm tracker, it is our anticipation that the results that we are seeing from the local economy tracker would further engender interest among policymakers, among development partners and funders to commit to us understanding what is happening at the local level as far as the fight against COVID-19 is concerned. And as I indicated, gives us a platform to learn lessons from which our GDP at the local level will be computed. I see that online we have close to 80 participants, and in this room we have more than 20 participants, and this is very encouraging in terms of having 100 people share with us live the findings from this local economy tracker. It is our anticipation that the messages that we're going to share with you will be communicated in the context that we conducted this survey so that interpretations thereof would be suited in the right context. With this note, thank you very much for joining us, and we all look forward to an instructive engagement in the next 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. That's wonderful remarks. And as Prof did indicate, this work was done in collaboration with UNDP. And so at this moment, I have the pleasure to invite the Deputy Resident Representative of UNDP, Mr. Zurich Hollander, to give us his remarks.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure that I can speak at this launch of the COVID-19 Local Economies Tracker. And I think following the business tracker, this is yet another demonstration of the strong partnership that we have with government and the people of Ghana, and in particular also the Ghana Statistical Services. The COVID-19 Local Economies Tracker is part of our broader efforts to build the resilience of local economies, and in doing so, to ensure that district, municipal, and metropolitan assemblies play a central role in the recovery process for the entire country. The results of the COVID-19 Local Economies Tracker will shape not just the recovery efforts at the local level, but also how these efforts will be financed. It is UNDP's commitment to continue to support these joint efforts within the context of integrating development financing at this level and across the country. When I read the report, a few things have caught my eyes in the results, and I just want to briefly reflect upon them. First, Not surprisingly, COVID-19 had a negative impact on local economies, reducing production and increasing prices. This is also what we saw with the COVID-19 business tracker. The results, however, show how vibrant local communities are, especially with non-state actors complementing the efforts of government. And this is an important lesson for all of us. Recovery efforts need to bring everyone on board. Even if relatively few assemblies so far have initiated recovery efforts, it is important that these are inclusive for them to be effective and transformative. Second, the results show a rise in crime, especially in lockdown localities, but also in border districts. It is important that the safety and security Ghanaians enjoy today is protected and continued to be preserved. Finally, I note that we are not starting from scratch, but that structures already exist to strengthen the resilience of local economies for them to be able to absorb, adapt, and transform when faced with similar shocks. It is our collective call to strengthen these capacities so that local economies can maintain stability and flexibility towards transformation. In closing, I would like to thank the teams of UNDP and GSS, and UNDP looks forward to a continued partnership with the government and the people of Ghana. So I wish us all fruitful discussions today, and thank you all for participating actively. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for that wonderful remarks. Let me quickly give my apologies for wrongly addressing Madam Zek Holanda. Thank you for the remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've gotten to the point we've all been waiting for, to be presented with the findings, the key findings of the study that was undertaken. At this moment, we invite Professor Kobena Nim, the government statistician, to lead us, to walk us through the key findings of the local economy tracker. Thank you, Prof. You're welcome.
Thank you, John. So as we indicated earlier on, we earlier on shared with you the releases from the household job tracker and subsequently the firm job tracker. So in no uncertain terms, COVID-19 has impacted on households and firms in Ghana. The question really now is, why would one want to investigate how COVID-19 is impacting on local economies? So in our discussions, we held the view that indeed it's impacted on households and firms, and it was quite obvious, but given experiences across the globe in other local economies that similar devastation, disruptions have affected their economies, with critical examples with what happened to Liverpool some years back, and also what happened with Detroit some years back. With the COVID-19 pandemic and the related restrictions, one would ask the question, how would individual local economies be affected? What is the degree of variation in the impact that they're going to observe? And in what dimensions are they going to have these impacts? So based on this historical perspective of experiences in other countries, there was the need for us to rethink how local economies would be impacted in varying ways and in different pathways. The other issue that struck our attention had to do with whether state and non-state agencies are on a timely basis providing the needed support to local economies or otherwise, and if they are doing that, in what dimensions are they providing these support to the local economies? Then the third question that we thought is useful for our discussions around how local economies would overcome the impact, the challenges associated with COVID-19 is whether local economies in themselves have the requisite structures that are needed to overcome the challenges, or even whether they have the initiative or would always want to continue to rely on central government, state institutions, and other non-state institutions to come up with these interventions. Then fourthly, we were struck by the fact that since our Living Standards Survey in 1998, 1999, followed by the Living Standards Survey in 2005, 2006, and the last but one Living Standards Survey in 2013, 2014, and the most recent one. Continuously, we've seen an increase in our Gini coefficient, and the Gini coefficient simply gives us a sense of how inequality has gone up or has reduced over the period. And as a country, consistently since 2005, 2006, we see our Gini coefficient increasing from around 0.40%, Gini index, to 0.43 Gini index. So with the outset of COVID-19 and with different levels of impact across different economies, and more importantly, the potential to see different levels of assistance, we ask ourselves whether COVID-19 will potentially sustain the increase in inequality across districts and across localities, as in the past period we've been observing. And lastly, there was the need to think about expectations of local economies as far as the recovery duration is concerned. So essentially, these 5 issues sort of motivated the need for us to think about how local economies would also be affected by the incidence of COVID-19. With this motivation, I move on to notes to guide us in terms of the methodology that we use. From our perspective, this is critical so that we interpret these results in the context in which the analysis or the data collection and analysis was done. First of all, it is important to all of us have in mind that the unit at which we are doing the analysis, the unit at which we are doing the observation is at the locality level. We are not doing the unit of observation at the household level, or neither are we doing it at the firm level as we did with the previous rapid surveys. So in this particular one, our units of observation are localities. At Ghana Statistical Service, it's a challenge reconciling our definition of localities with the definition of other localities from other agencies. So at GSS, we define localities as any hamlet that has either one person or more people that have their own living arrangements together. So even if you find a hamlet with just one person in there and that person makes its own decision-making by him or herself, we define it as a locality. We've updated our 2010 locality list, and now we have about close to 131,000 localities in Ghana ahead of the 2020 population and housing census. And in this presentation, we're going to use localities and communities synonymously. In terms of sampling, what we thought we should do for it to have the national relevance is to ensure that all the 16 regions. Hi, Fred.
The slides are not moving. The slides are not moving. The slides.
It's moving from my end.
Yes. So please, just give us a moment and let's fix it and come back. Just a moment. So let's post.
Wow.
So we just take some 10 seconds to get it fixed, and then we'll get back to you.
Is it showing now?
Yes, I think now we have it on screen now. Yes. Okay, so sorry for that mishap, technology. So Prof will take it from there. Thank you.
So from a methods point of view, as I indicated, we had to make sure that the study is nationally representative. So by so doing, we did 2 levels of sampling. The first stage that we stratified the country, and the second stage that we did systematic sampling. By way of stratification, we ensure that all regions in the countries, the 16 administrative regions in the country, have been targeted. And out of the 260 districts that we have, we ensure that 50% of these districts have been reached. Then, in view of the focus of this study, we decided to stratify based on the restrictions that were laid out by the president. So we segmented the 260 districts in the country into 3 domains. The lockdown districts, and this is principally made up of the 40 districts that we can find them in Greater Accra and Greater Kumasi that experienced the partial lockdown during the period of the restrictions. And also we identified all the 47 districts that had experiences as a result of the closures of our borders, and principally these 47 border districts span across all the 16 administrative regions, but they were predominantly in the Northeast, Upper West, Upper East regions, and this is where we had the dominance of the border districts. And the third category of district had to do with the other districts other than the lockdown and the border districts. So essentially, we purposely targeted all the lockdown district, that is the 40 lockdown district and the 47 border district, and placed emphasis from a sampling point of view on how to target the 173 other districts and selected 43 out of that. Then the second level of sampling had to do with how we identified the localities, and based on proportional to size, using the population as the denominator, we sampled these localities from each of these 3 domains of district. So eventually we ended up with 2,770 localities out of the 131,000 localities that we have from our updated list of localities, which constitutes about 2.18% of the localities. Data collection spanned the period 28th May to 30th June 2020, and our focus people for data collection, respondents for data collection, were opinion leaders ranging between 4 and 10 in the selected localities. We share with you key findings from the local economies tracker by sharing with you initial 2 slides that gives a sense of how local economies in themselves experience the impact of COVID-19, and then switch over to the coping strategies, the types of assistance, and the expected recovery as we saw in the different local economies. The first observation was the rise in crime, as was indicated by our UNDP representative. Clearly, the evidence pointed to the fact that as a result of COVID-19, there was an upsurge in crime across all the 3 different districts. So localities in the lockdown district, localities in the border district, and localities in the other districts all experienced some increase in crime as a result of COVID-19. Specifically, if you put all these 3 districts together, at least a third of the localities in these districts indicated that there had been an increase in crime. The district that suffered the most as a result of COVID-19 from the perspective of crime is lockdown district. And if you cut across all the different components of crime, that is theft, burglary, violence, assault, murder, we see that lockdown district had the hardest hit as far as crime related to COVID-19 is concerned. And specifically, we had close to 50% of localities in lockdown districts indicating that they had experienced some experience in their crime incidents. Of the different types of crime, as I indicated, from theft to murder, theft was the highest across all the 3 districts, that is the lockdown, the border, and the other district. And therefore, from a total point of view, theft had the highest incidence. We go ahead to share with you the economic impact of COVID-19. And as was indicated in my motivation, the economic impact of COVID-19 cannot be doubted. We've shared with Ghanaians the impact of COVID-19 on households from the perspective of loss of income, loss of jobs, and also from the FEM tracker, we've shared with you the economic impact of COVID-19 from the perspective of reduced sales and also from the perspective of reduced labor supply. But from this perspective, we look at the economy in its aggregate, that is the local economy in its aggregate. And consistent with what we found from the household tracker, what we found from the FEM tracker, and indeed what we found from our second quarter GDP, where oil GDP contracted by 3.2% and non-oil GDP contracted by 3.4%. From the local economy tracker perspective, we equally find that production and sales have also gone down, or went down for that matter, during the period of COVID-19. Specifically, we saw border districts getting the highest reduction in sales and getting the highest reduction in production. At least 9 out of 10 localities in border districts indicated a reduction in sales, and at least 7 out of 10 localities in border districts indicated a reduction in their production. This is what, from our point of view, would give us a sense of how we can, into the future, begin to compute our GDP at the local level, and that is what we're going to put together to give us our GDP at the regional level. In contrast to localities in lockdown districts, we saw that the highest contraction in labor supply was in the lockdown district. That is, while border district experienced the highest contraction in terms of sales and production, we saw that lockdown districts had the highest contraction from the perspective of labor supply and cost of credit. Specifically, localities in lockdown districts, about 2 out of every 5 saw a contraction in labor supply, and close to 30% saw an increase in cost of credit. We go on to share with you the experience from the perspective of prices across the localities. Again, we look at this from the perspective of the 3 domains of the district, that is the lockdown district, the border district, and the other districts. What came out clearly was the variations in prices across the 13 divisions that we use in computing our inflation rate. For purposes of this work, we didn't get 2 out of the 13 divisions simply because of the restrictions that were placed on sectors such as the hotels and the industries. Across the 3 domains of district, that is the lockdown, the border, and the other district, we saw that for all the 11 divisions that we collected price data on, the border district recorded an increase across all the 11 divisions. In the case of the lockdown and other district, we didn't see a similar increase across all the 11 divisions. Also realized across 3 different lockdown districts. Within the domain of transport, we realized that while we saw a contraction in transport fares in lockdown district, we saw an increase of 11.1% and 2.4% respectively for border district and other districts. In the context of food and non-alcoholic beverages, we also saw significant variations in one context, putting border and other districts together and lockdown districts in another context, specifically where we saw an upsurge in prices respectively by 6.6% and 5.0% for border and other districts. We saw an increase of 2.5%, indicating that between border district and lockdown district, the percentage point difference for food and non-alcoholic beverages was 4.1 percentage points. Another domain that we saw variations across these districts had to do with restaurants and accommodation services. Specifically, again, in this domain, we saw a contraction in the lockdown districts, and this would partly be related to the demand and supply issues as a result of the closures of most restaurants and accommodation services in the lockdown districts relative to the border and other districts. So while we saw a reduction in prices by 0.6%, we saw an increase of 1 percentage point and a much more increase for other districts by 4.6%. We move forward to share with you the types of assistance that we receive, that localities receive as a result of COVID-19. And this type of assistance were related to the expected interventions that the government instituted as a result of COVID-19, specifically the distribution of Veronica buckets, the distribution of personal protective equipment, the distribution of both cooked and raw food, water, and to an extent, cash assistance. And what we realized in here is that there was much skew against the distribution for lockdown districts as against the other districts, specifically the border districts and the other districts. While the assistance for 2 lockdown districts were consistently higher than the other districts, we saw that the variations were much more stark in the domains of food. So we see about a 78% difference for cooked food and about a 74% difference for raw food for the distribution that went to lockdown areas vis-a-vis the distribution that went to border districts. So again, there was much concentration of interventions that were going into the lockdown districts relative to the interventions that went to the border district. We also realized that cash interventions were relatively minimal, so a lot of focus were on non-economic impact or direct impact that would help resolve the challenges associated with COVID-19 rather than some other long-term interventions that one would have expected. We went ahead to look at the sources of these assistance across these different localities. And within this domain, we separated assistance that came from central government vis-a-vis assistance that came from district assemblies, and again, assistance that came from members of parliament. Again, from the perspective of assistance, we realized that the lockdown district had the most from central government, district assemblies, and members of parliament. Whereas in the case of lockdown district and border district, the distribution, the assistance were mainly from district assemblies and members of parliament. And in this case, they categorically distinguished between interventions that were coming from central government vis-a-vis the interventions coming from district assemblies and members of parliament. We also observed that some non-state institutions, specifically churches and philanthropists, provided support to the various districts as a result of COVID-19 related challenges. We move on to specifically look at interventions that were associated with economic interventions from the perspective of district assemblies. The observation brought to the fore the fact that almost 60% of localities in lockdown districts did not experience any initiative of economic intervention from the perspective of district assemblies. These percentages were relatively higher for border districts and other districts. Specifically for border districts, we saw 85.7% of the localities, and for other districts, 74.5% of the localities, indicating that district assemblies had not taken any initiative from the perspective of economic interventions needed to address the challenges associated with COVID-19. This is clearly some of the things that we need to look into as we move ahead to institute interventions that would help address the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, some of the economic interventions that we thought some support could have been instituted were in the domains of creation of alternative market, granting of some soft loans to abate the effect of COVID-19, and supply of some subsidy inputs, as was indicated when we did our business tracker. We move forward to share with you some coping strategies of the localities, again, by type of district. Again, there were variations in the coping strategies that were instituted across the three domains of district. And these different dimensions of coping strategies range from assistance from families, borrowing from families, right down to interventions such as reducing food consumptions and reducing non-food consumptions. While we saw a lot more localities in lockdown districts either receiving assistance or borrowing from friends and families, in contrast, in the case of non-food consumption, we saw that there wasn't much difference across the three districts, that is the lockdown district, the border district, and the other district. We also saw that some of the coping strategies in the lockdown district would lead to a situation where we're going to have a debt overhang for households in these localities. And we reached this conclusion based on the fact that some localities indicated that they were postponing their payment, they were further borrowing from other institutions, and these are issues that are likely to lead to an increased debt overhang if proper interventions are not instituted. Then we go on to share with you the effects that the interventions on electricity and water had on these three different localities, that is the lockdown district, the border district, and the other district. We observed that within the border district, over 90% of them indicated that they did not benefit from the pipe-borne water intervention simply because of the dimensions by which they assess their water within these localities. So because they are not locked down onto the grid system, they are not locked down onto the national system and use other means to access water, they did not benefit from these interventions. And this impact was largely in the area of the border district relative to the lockdown district, that we realized that just about only 50% of them did not benefit relative to the over 90% that did not benefit in the lockdown district. Also, we realized a significant percentage in the other district that did not benefit from the interventions from water that was received. From the perspective of electricity, the percentages were not remarkably as high as we saw in the case of water. So while we saw just about a third of localities in border districts indicating that they did not benefit, it was only 3.4% in the lockdown district that did not benefit, and 26.7% in the other district that did not benefit. We go on to share with you whether localities have structures in place to help abate the pandemic. And we realize that more than half of localities across all the structures have across all the localities have some structures in place to abate COVID-19. But again, we saw variations in the structures across these localities. While we saw that a lot of these structures at the locality level are existent in the border district and the other district, to our observation, we didn't see these structures well instituted in the lockdown district. And here what we mean by structures are local structures, locality structures such as business assistants, such as locality leaders, such as corporate associations, such as business consumer agencies, which would be established in local areas to ensure that in the event of COVID-19, they are well prepared to abate its effect. And as indicated, these structures were more pronounced in the border district and the other districts rather than the lockdown district. It is important to indicate that the statutory districts that one would expect, such as the district standing committee, were found in the lockdown district relatively more than what we found in the lockdown and other districts. Based on the presence of structures in local economies, what we did was to get a sense of the preparedness of local economies to fight any pandemic as we move on. So we did some computation using principal component analysis to get an index of the preparedness of local economies in the event of a pandemic. And based on the previous slide where we realized that structures were in place in border districts and other districts, we saw an index in the positive context of 0.244 and 0.208 for other districts and border districts, and we saw a negative index for lockdown district. This is simply because in the lockdown district, we did not see much of the local structures that I indicated earlier on, specifically the corporate associations, locality leaders, business associations, that localities themselves would set up to address challenges that would hit these localities. The last area that we put emphasis on ahead of the highlights are the expectations on economic recovery. And again, we saw variations in expectations across the three domains of districts that we use for this analysis. The expectations of economic recovery in lockdown districts was pretty much mixed, while we saw about 37% indicating that the recovery is going to take more than a year. We had about 45% of them indicating that it's going to take just about a year. And we had about 14% indicating that they were uncertain. In contrast, in border and other districts, we saw more than a third of these localities indicating that they are uncertain about how COVID-19 is going to recover within their localities. This clearly points to a sense of a possible information gap across these three districts, as this survey has shown. Ladies and gentlemen, we share with you 7 highlights from the local economy release. The first highlight that we share with you is an increase in crime for all the 3 districts, as was indicated. We saw about 34.1% of an increase in crime across all the districts, that is the lockdown, the border, and the other districts. Striking was the increase in crime for lockdown districts, where we saw close to 50% of the lockdown districts indicating that there was an increase in crime during COVID-19 and the lockdown period. Based on the effects, that is the economic effect and the assistance from the various state agencies and increase in prices, we conclude that localities in border districts were most hit by COVID-19, specifically from the perspective that across all the 11 divisions of prices that we collected data, localities in the border district indicated a higher price level. And from the perspective of economic impact, we saw that localities in the border district recorded 93.2% or indicated 93.2% increase in, reduction in sales, and also 74.5% indicated reduction in production. Assistance received by localities for food and water was skewed to lockdown districts. Specifically, we saw a 78 percentage point difference between assistance that was received for food. In this context, we put food that was cooked and food that is cooked and raw food together. And between lockdown district and border district, we saw a 78 percentage point difference. From the perspective of water, we saw also a 26 percentage point difference between what was received by lockdown district and what was received by border and other districts. So this clearly points to skewness of assistance going to lockdown districts relative to border and other districts. We also observed that the assistance that was received mainly were from central government, district assemblies, and MPs, and these assistance were also skewed to lockdown districts as against border and other districts. The fifth highlight that we share with you is in relation to the structures that exist in our district, and we get a sense of whether these districts are ready to fight pandemic or are ready to fight a pandemic on their own. So specifically, we looked at local structures such as community development committees, locality leaders, corporate associations, and business assistance committees. And to our observation, these structures were more pronounced in border districts and other districts relative to lockdown districts. So this gives us a sense of the fact that border districts and other districts have made some attempt to set up some interventions to help them fight against COVID-19. But clearly with such pandemics, complementary interventions from state institutions and higher administrative units are required to support these local agencies. The sixth highlight is that given the skewness of the interventions and the impact against border districts and other districts, we fear that with COVID-19, we might sustain the increase in inequality as we see in the country. This conclusion is further driven by the fact that most of the border districts in our sample are from regions that have high incidence of poverty, specifically the Northeast region, the Upper East region, the Upper West region, and the Volta region. So based on our last poverty count across these administrative regions, and for the fact that incidence is high in these regions, and coupled with COVID-19 skewed against the border districts, there's a temptation for one to argue that moving forward, some necessary steps should be put in place to reduce a potential increase that might be associated with COVID-19. And lastly, we put the fact that in terms of expected recovery, we saw mixed expectations even within lockdown districts and across lockdown districts and other districts, that is the border districts and the other district. Specifically, 45% of the lockdown districts indicated that economic recovery would occur within 1 year, while 30% indicated that it's going to happen more than a year, with 14% indicating that they were uncertain. While in the case of border districts and other districts, we saw more than 35% indicating that they were uncertain on how we're going to experience economic recovery for COVID-19. In terms of next steps, what we intend to do is to further engage with the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development and all the district assemblies on a stakeholder engagement as far as these findings are concerned, and begin to institute measures on how to possibly roll out the second wave of the local economy tracker, and also how to guide towards the interventions that are being instituted to ensure that COVID-19 is abated and is abated within a relatively shorter period. The second thing that we want to do once we've done these consultations and validated the various perspectives of the state institutions, we're going to put this together with our findings and we're going to put out the main report with this wave one of the local economics tracker. We take this advantage to particularly say thank you to the United Nations Development Program that did not only provide financial support, but also provided technical support guidance in shaping our initial thoughts on the need to do an assessment on how COVID-19 is impacting on the local economy. And I'm particularly happy to have heard the second representative coordinator indicating the commitment and continuous support of UNDP to Ghana Statistical Service to carry out its mandate, especially in such difficult moments. Then also would want to thank the opinion leaders that took time off their schedule to ensure that we have the relevant data that has brought to the fore these findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, and gentlemen. For our in-house, there are about 45 in-house participants. We are going to give you copies of the news brief. And for the over 100 participants, online participants, you will find copies of the brief on both the websites of Ghana Statistical Service and the UNDP. And so we go to the probability proportional to size, give more opportunity to our online participants, ask questions, make comments. As I said, you raise your hand or you use the chat room, and then we'll take some also from our in-house audience. So please, our online participants, just raise your hand and it will give you an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. And for our 46 in-house participants, please just raise your hand. For media partners, we would love you to indicate the media house that you are representing. You proceed with your question. Thank you. So the floor is open for question and answers, Q&A. Okay, there's a question, in-house question. Yes, your media house and your question, please. Please come forward. Yeah, yes.
My name is Ebenezer Samuel. I just want to find out from the highlights, it appears the border counts were the highest hit when it comes to COVID-19. I just wanted to find out during your survey, were they telling you the kind of how they were living? I know they were living on some of these economic activities, production and all that. But since those things dropped drastically, what were the alternative means of living for them? Was there a way your survey find out something like that? I just want to know. That's one. And then secondly, with the lockdown communities, we know that Accra, for instance, businesses were hot, kids were hot and all that. So I want to find out, does it mean that the various support that was given to some of these people, especially the SMEs, government announced some stimulus packages and all that, does it mean they've not felt the impact yet, or they are still expecting it? Has there been any way your survey can give us an outcome on that?
Thank you, Joy. We have Oponya Peter online. Opon, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you. Peter, Mr. Opon, please unmute your microphone and ask your question, please. Hello, Opon, are you talking? Okay, then please can you lower your hand if maybe you're okay with your concern. Any other question from in-house? Yes, please. I think, okay. So for the benefit of our online participants, I read from Atenka TV, we want to know the form of assistance that the local economies will need to become resilient, even though the study found out that they have some structures in place, and we recommended some assistance to be given to them. So what form of assistance are we recommending? Thank you, Atenka. Anyone in-house or online, before we get to Prof, if we can get one more for Prof to respond. Yes.
We do know that during that lockdown period, there was heavy police presence across the various communities, so to speak. Now, how do you explain to me that during that period, we saw an increase in crime? I need a clarification.
So Class FM is a bit concerned about the increase in crime and want to know how that might have happened. That's interesting. So we will give Prof the opportunity to respond to these three sets of questions. Then we can come for another round, if any. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. These are very useful questions and it would always provide us the platform to further speak to the data that we've collected. Let me start with the third concern, which I must indicate that it's a very genuine concern because on one hand, indeed, we saw an increased police presence during the lockdown period of COVID-19. And on another breath, we are seeing an increase in crime. My perspective on this is based on a conjecture rather than what the data is telling us. And this is so because we did not have the opportunity to assess a number of issues such as the timing of police presence, the extent of police presence, and the incidence of crime. For us to be able to do justice to this work, we should know exactly whether the response by police was not reactionary rather than proactive. If it was proactive, then it's a genuine question. But if it's reactionary, it means the incidence of crime led to the high presence of police in our localities. But because we are not privy to these questions, the issue that we need to think about is when was the timing of the police presence? To what extent were they dominant in these districts that have high incidence of crime? And if we compare the intensity of the crime and the focus of the police presence, we'll get an understanding of whether it did make an impact or not. It's possible that it did make an impact, but relatively the impact was minimal. And if it hadn't been the presence of police, we would have seen a much more higher percentage of localities indicating that crime did occur. So it's an interesting question, but all that this does for us is the need for us to continue with different rounds of the survey, as I've indicated, and also look at the different dimensions that I've emphasized. The other question, which again is very important, is the question related to the assistance that is needed. And our colleague from Atinka was spot on to have raised the question on what has to be done, because we do set up these initiatives at the locality level, but unless it's guided or integrated into mainstream activities, it'll be a challenge to realize the full potential of these. So again, on top of my head, the recommendation is that it's about time we recognize the presence of these locality leaders, corporate associations, business community advisors, and think about how they can be integrated, formalized into the district assembly or standing committees. So the two strong recommendations from my point of view is, first of all, that needed recognition for these local institutions, and secondly, formalizing and integrating their operations into mainstream higher administrative level structures such as the standing committees at the district level. The third question from Joy is also equally important, to give a good understanding of the phase in which the data was collected. And in my introduction, I indicated that the data was collected over the period 28th May 2020 to 30th June 2020. Within this period, it will be difficult to assess the extent to which the interventions that have been instituted by the government, such as the stimulus package, is really making an impact or not. Indeed, around that period, we're still on the drawing board thinking about how to deploy the stimulus package and other interventions that government was instituting. And even for localities that have received some form of interventions, we should appreciate the fact that it takes some time for these interventions to have the necessary impact. In terms of coping strategies, as I indicated on my slides, we had a wide range of coping strategies. The predominant one was relying on relatives, that is friends and family for assistance or borrowing from them. But this really stretched up to other interventions, such as reducing their food consumption, reducing their non-food consumption, and to the point that especially localities in the lockdown district had to resort to borrowing from banks, and also those that had to resort to deferring payment and purchasing on credit. And I put emphasis on these other types of interventions because, as I indicated, this potentially might lead to an increased debt overhang for households moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. So we have Clement Akolo. Please unmute yourself and make your comment.
He's talking. So how can't we hear? Nana? He's speaking.
Hello, technical team, can you help? Clement is talking about.
Hello.
Yeah, that's fine. Hello, go ahead.
Hello, please.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello, please. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, Clement, we can hear you.
Please, can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Clement Akolo. I report for AfricaNewsRadio.com. Okay. My question is. Okay, my question is, when Prof was speaking, he said that there were some districts, actually their coping strategies will lead to, okay, so I'm saying that my question is that when Doc was speaking, Prof was speaking, he said that some coping strategies adopted by
Hello, Clement. We seem to be losing you.
will lead to debt overhang are not instituted. So I wanted to find out what interventions that you would recommend for such districts. Or in his answer, he mentioned it again that
Okay, Clement.
some debt overhang
Hello, Clement.
are not instituted. So
I think you have a bad line, and if I got it correctly, you want to know the type of accommodation that will be given to assist communities, if you like, do more with the coping center they have. Otherwise, you can please share your question on the chat room. Your line was getting bad towards the tail end of your question. But otherwise, we'll try and see what you can do with what we're able to pick from your question. Any question in-house or online so that we can wrap up quickly? Yes, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Desmond. I work with that from your presentation, especially the highlights that you had on economic recovery. some localities that were having like academics say they give a certain timeline as to when they expect the recovery. I was just wondering what went into that decision, what made them think that after a year or after 2 years we're expecting a recovery. What are the grounds that what are the things that they considered and for them to come out with such timeline? I'm looking at we know the COVID-19 is still around, there are so many uncertainties. So what informed their decision to come out with a target of a year or two for recovery?
Thank you. So
Thank you.
the question from Ghana
basically is on how the respondents
came about
the
the time frame
that would
that to take
the economies to recover from the shocks brought about by the pandemic. Yes, there's no hand up online. If there's any in-house question, we can take it, then we wrap up. Don't want to keep participants too long. Okay, so once I can't see any hand, I give off the opportunity to respond. Let me quickly say that Mr. Frederick should be getting ready. Once we are done with the question and answers, we invite you to give your remarks. Prof, please.
Thank you. The first question is related to interventions that would be necessary to minimize the incidence of debt overhang that one would associate with coping strategies that are being put in place to abate COVID-19. Indeed, what made us draw that conclusion is related to strategies such as purchases on credit, such as increase in loan assessing of loans from financial institutions, and deferment of payment responsibilities that localities in all the 3 districts that we identified were engaged in. And these directly points to the fact that if proactive interventions are not instituted, it's likely to lead to an increase in debt overhang. I must indicate that quite a number of options are available to policymakers, and indeed some of these interventions are already being instituted. We see all the interventions related to the activities of different financial institutions, and I'm also aware that at some point there was a discussion around making cash transfers available. I'm not too sure how that discussion has been concluded, but definitely even from the macro point of view, interventions to take off relief from the perspective of utilities and also to create a conducive macroeconomic atmosphere are all interventions that would reduce the other cost dimensions for households and free up some space for them to minimize or adhere to their debt obligations to avoid borrowing and deferment of loan obligations. The other question relating to criteria informing the timelines, again, was as a result of the vast options that are available to all of us within the global space in terms of the uncertainty surrounding COVID-19. So indeed, you are right to say that we are all uncertain on what is going to happen, especially at a time that some economies are facing wave 2 of it. But in the space of this bigger picture, what other local economies are experiencing is the extent of confidence in the interventions that government is instituting, and also other coping strategies that from their point of view would help mitigate against a longer duration for the COVID-19, the life of COVID-19. So clearly we did not, although we did not ask a specific questions on what is making you indicate a year or otherwise, with this wide range of options that are available to localities, it definitely prompted some of them indicating that they are uncertain and others indicating that it's going to occur within a year. And also we should bear in mind that the experiences across these localities did vary significantly. So if you live in an area where the impact is relatively high in terms of high incidence, and you've not seen much of the intervention, or you are not privy to the things that government is doing, then there's the likelihood of indicating that you're uncertain on how long the economic recovery pathway is going to take. And that is why we draw the conclusion that there seems to be some information gap for localities in border districts relative to localities in lockdown districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you all for your contribution. We will at this moment invite our key brother. Prof indicated that they have worked closely with UNDP. This is one of the great men that have been very, very supportive. So we invite Frederick Mugisha to give us his remarks. Frederick, please.
Okay. So thank you very much, John. Let me say that for me, this is a process of transformation. And I am very happy because Ghana and the people of Ghana have embraced the idea that we cannot go back. We have to keep moving forward. And so what the local economies do, they help actualize that fact. And they actualize it in such a way that they are able to adapt, they are able to foresee the shocks coming, but when they come, they're able to recover and use them to transform. And so what this data gives us is to begin to shape how that process will eventually happen. And like Zilke said, we are very, very happy to be part of this transformation process, and we will continue the partnership moving forward. Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you, Frederick, and thank you for the support that you give us to carry this out. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about wrapping up, and as custom with the one, we'll give Prof the opportunity to give us the closing remarks, and then we give the final words and go. Prof, please.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the over 120 participants, both online and in this room physically, that have made time for this presentation. As I indicated in my opening remark, we hope that with the context in which these results have been released, we go out there and share it, bearing in mind the context in which the data was collected. We urge all of you to visit our website for further updates on our fight against COVID-19 by providing data for the government to ensure that the right policies are instituted. By way of closing remarks, I want to indicate that with all the data sets that we are collecting, we are in the process of cleaning the data sets and make the data sets available to policymakers, academics, especially graduate students and people in the area of development to further look into the data to unearth the different issues that we have. For this particular round of survey, we have more than 100 analyzable variables in there. And clearly what we've shared with you is not even up to a fifth of the analysis that we can do. Hopefully, if we roll out the second wave of this, it's going to give us an opportunity to follow the same cohort of localities, and that will definitely present to us an opportunity to do further cohort level analysis. And some of the questions that were asked in terms of how the interventions that are instituted by government is yielding the right impact can be answered once we look at that data set. The last thing that I want to request of you is that given our plans moving forward, we urge all of you for a sustained engagement with Ghana Statistical Service, because it's one thing we doing these analysis, and it's another thing these analysis being put in the right use. So we encourage all media men, all policymakers, seated around this table to further sustain their engagement with us, and we pledge to our commitment to ensure that we support the fight against COVID-19 with data and evidence. On that note, thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everybody. I know Madam Praise want us to have online video shoots out. So please, you can put on your video while they take a photograph of us. And for our in-house, we ask our cameras and yes, to take an in-house picture. While the online one is done by Madam Praise and her team. So please, all of us, let's put on our video. Let's show our beautiful faces.
Thank you, John. So the camera is ready.
So camera is ready for all. Cheers. Make sure you're not left behind. We don't leave anybody behind. Madam, are you through?
Yes, please. We've taken it now.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your participation. Do have a good day. Thank you. So our media in-house, Paul and Deborah will attend to you.